For nearly 80 years, the world has wondered what truly happened beneath Berlin's ruins. Hidden deep underground, Hitler's secret bunker became the stage for his final terrifying act. But now, newly uncovered evidence has exposed something far darker than history has ever recorded. What investigators found buried in those concrete chambers is not just disturbing, it changes everything we thought we knew. The bunker beneath Berlin, deep under the heart of Berlin, hidden from sunlight and sound, stood a secret world that only a few ever saw. It was called the Führer Bunker, and it became one of the most infamous places in history. What started as a simple shelter slowly transformed into the nerve center of Adolf Hitler's final days. The story began in 1936 when construction of a small underground refuge known as the Vorbunker started beneath the Reich Chancellery. It was designed to protect officials from air raids, nothing more. But as the war dragged on and Allied bombs began to fall over Berlin, fear grew stronger inside Hitler's circle. By 1944, a second and far deeper structure was built beneath the Chancellery Garden. This was the Führer Bunker, a hidden fortress designed to keep Hitler alive even if the world above him was collapsing. The bunker lay almost 9 meters below the surface, buried as deep as a 3-story building underground. It was surrounded by concrete walls so thick that even heavy bombs could not penetrate them. Engineers used up to 4 meters of reinforced concrete for the ceilings and walls, turning the entire complex into an underground fortress. Inside were 30 small rooms connected by narrow corridors. Every room felt cold and silent, as if the air itself was heavy with fear. To survive below ground, the bunker needed to function like a living machine. It had its own diesel generator to provide power, an air filtration system to clean the suffocating atmosphere, and water pumps to prevent flooding from Berlin's high water table. Thick telephone and radio cables linked the bunker to the surface, allowing Hitler to send orders to his crumbling armies even when the city above was on fire. There were 2 secret escape routes, hidden stairways that led into the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Few knew where they were, and fewer still would live to use them. Above ground, Berlin was being reduced to ashes. Yet below, inside those damp and claustrophobic walls, life went on. It was dimly lit, filled with the constant hum of machines and the distant echo of explosions. The smell of oil, sweat, and concrete hung in the air. Water dripped from the ceilings. Every sound of the war above was muffled into a dull roar, giving the illusion of safety even as destruction crept closer. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere was cold and suffocating. There were no windows, only narrow corridors and rooms lit by dim electric bulbs. The sound of the outside world reached them as distant thunder, the echoes of bombs striking the city above. The air was thick and stale, and the constant vibration of explosions reminded everyone that Berlin was dying. But even in those silent subterranean corridors, a darker psychological drama was unfolding, one that would later fuel some of the most haunting mysteries in history: life inside the Führer Bunker. By January 1945, Berlin was collapsing under heavy Allied bombing. Smoke and fire filled the air, and the once powerful Nazi regime was falling apart. On January 16th, Adolf Hitler abandoned the world above and moved into the Führer Bunker. Each day followed a strict routine. Hitler woke late in the morning and received military briefings in the map room. Generals and staff brought him reports filled with bad news, but few dared to tell him the full truth. He would pace back and forth, studying maps and giving orders to armies that no longer existed. Afterwards, he had lunch with his secretaries and occasionally with Eva Braun. The meals were simple, often vegetarian, and eaten in silence. Traudl Junge, his young secretary, later remembered typing his final political testament in that bunker. She described him as pale, trembling, and lost in his own thoughts. The once confident leader now looked fragile and broken, yet even in those final days, he refused to surrender. The bunker held around 30 people, each trapped in the same claustrophobic routine. Martin Bormann controlled access to Hitler, deciding who could enter and what information reached him. Heinz Ling, Hitler's valet, took care of his personal needs while others handled communication equipment and guarded the exits. Outside, artillery fire shook the ground and dust fell from the ceilings. The staff worked by candlelight when power failed, and sleep came only in short, uneasy moments. Some tried to maintain normality. Eva Braun brought small touches of comfort like flowers and music. Occasionally, Hitler took short walks in the Chancellery garden with his dog Blondie. These moments were brief, often interrupted by the sound of shelling. As food and hope ran out, despair grew. Those trapped below began to realize the end was near. Hitler made it clear that he would never be captured alive. He often said his body must never fall into Soviet hands. Every word carried a sense of finality, as if he were preparing everyone for what was to come. But as the Soviet troops advanced outside, a final act of desperation and horror was about to unfold behind those sealed doors. The terrifying final days. By April 1945, Berlin was no longer a city. It was a battlefield covered in smoke, rubble, and the cries of the dying. The once mighty capital of the Third Reich had turned into a graveyard of shattered buildings and broken dreams. Deep beneath the ruins in the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler and his closest followers faced the end they had long feared. Soviet artillery thundered above them, shaking the walls and filling the air with dust. The bunker was completely surrounded. There was no escape. Inside, fear and tension hung heavy. Hitler, once commanding millions, was now trapped in a few dimly lit rooms underground. His armies had fallen apart, and his allies had either fled or turned against him. Yet he still refused to surrender. Every new report from the front brought only disaster, but he continued to issue impossible orders to divisions that no longer existed. His mind was collapsing under the weight of defeat. On April 29th, the bunker became the setting for a strange and haunting ceremony. In a small, smoke-filled room, Hitler married Eva Braun, the woman who had stayed with him through the rise and fall of his empire. The ceremony lasted only minutes. Afterward, the new bride and groom shared a quiet meal with their staff. Soon after, Hitler summoned his secretaries and dictated his final political and private wills. His words were filled with anger, self-pity, and blame. He condemned his generals, cursed his enemies, and refused to accept responsibility for the destruction he had caused. That night, Hitler gathered his remaining inner circle. They sat together in silence as the bunker trembled with the sound of explosions above. He spoke of loyalty and honor, insisting that death was better than surrender. None dared to argue. Everyone knew what was coming. The next afternoon, on April 30th, witnesses heard a single gunshot. When the door to Hitler's private study opened, the scene was clear. Eva Braun had taken cyanide. Hitler had shot himself in the head. Their bodies were quickly wrapped in blankets and carried up the narrow staircase to the Chancellery garden. There, in a shallow crater, they were soaked in gasoline and set on fire by loyal aides. Flames rose briefly, then died under the gray Berlin sky. The following day, Joseph and Magda Goebbels followed their leader's path. They poisoned their 6 children as they slept, then took their own lives. By nightfall, the bunker had turned into a tomb. Only the distant roar of artillery echoed through the corridors, a final reminder of the world collapsing above. When the Soviets finally entered the scene they discovered would rock the historian's world and sow the seeds of decades of conspiracy, what Soviets found inside the bunker. When the guns finally fell silent on May 2nd, 1945, Soviet troops moved through the smoking ruins of Berlin. The once proud Reich Chancellery stood in pieces, its gardens blackened by fire and covered with debris. Beneath it, hidden behind concrete and steel, lay the Führer bunker, the last refuge of Adolf Hitler. The soldiers moved cautiously, aware that they were stepping into a place that had witnessed the final hours of the Nazi regime. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and decay. Broken furniture, burnt papers, and the smell of fuel filled the narrow corridors. The walls were streaked with soot, and maps of ruined battlefronts still hung on the walls, their lines of defense already lost to history. Every step echoed with the hollow sound of emptiness. Soviet investigators quickly realized they were walking through the remnants of a dying empire. In the garden above, they found what they believed to be the remains of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. The bodies had been burned beyond recognition, lying in shallow shell craters near the entrance. Charred bones and fragments of clothing were gathered and sent for examination. Among the debris inside the bunker, investigators also discovered blood-stained furniture and traces of cyanide capsules. The evidence suggested that death had come quickly and deliberately. Yet instead of revealing the truth, Joseph Stalin's government chose secrecy. Publicly, Soviet officials released confusing statements, sometimes claiming Hitler had escaped, other times insisting he was dead. This deliberate silence created decades of speculation and fueled conspiracy theories across the world. Even as the Western Allies demanded answers, Moscow kept its findings locked away, refusing to share details. According to files that were later declassified, the Soviets secretly removed the bodies and reburied them multiple times to hide the location. In 1970, under orders from the KGB, the remains were reportedly exhumed one last time, burned completely, and the ashes scattered into a nearby river. Stalin wanted to make sure no trace of Hitler would ever become a site of worship or remembrance. The bunker itself did not survive either. Soviet forces blew up parts of the structure, and what remained was later buried beneath layers of concrete and new construction. The place that had once held the heart of the Nazi regime disappeared from view, erased from the city above it. Only a few grim relics escaped destruction. Among them were fragments of a jawbone, a few dental bridges, a skull piece, and the blood-stained remains of a sofa. These items were quietly stored in Soviet archives for decades, guarded from public view. But when modern scientists finally examined these fragments many years later, what they discovered would shake the official story to its core, unearthing the evidence. When investigators first studied pieces of a jawbone and several dental bridges, the results were surprising. Hitler's personal dentist had long disappeared, but two of his assistants were still alive. They were shown the fragments and immediately recognized the work. The shape of the bridges and the fillings matched Hitler's dental records exactly. Their confirmation gave weight to the belief that the dictator had indeed died in 1945. For years, this was accepted as the strongest proof of his death. Then, in 2009, new scientific testing reopened the case. Two American researchers, Dr. Nick Bellantoni and Derlinda Strausbaugh, were granted rare access to the skull fragment and the blood-stained remains of a sofa kept in Moscow archives. Their results shocked the world. The blood samples from the sofa belonged to a man, which supported the story of Hitler's suicide. But the skull fragment told a different story. DNA analysis revealed that it belonged to a woman aged between 20 and 40. The skull also had a visible bullet hole, matching accounts that Hitler shot himself. But if the skull was female, whose was it? Some historians suggested it might belong to Eva Braun, who took cyanide beside him. Others believed it could be from another woman killed during the final days of the war. The revelation created confusion and cast doubt on decades of official reports. Scientists pointed out another important fact. Burning a body in the open, as Hitler's aides tried to do, cannot completely destroy bones. The temperature of such fires is not high enough to turn bones to ash. Teeth and fragments of jawbone usually survive. This explains why the dental remains, rather than the skull, might still tell the real story. Over time, more evidence surfaced showing how Soviet authorities might have manipulated or moved the remains. Some documents revealed that the bones were shifted between locations, sometimes even mixed with others. This secrecy helped the Soviet regime maintain control over the narrative. British historian Mark Felton later suggested that Hitler's staff may have planted false remains to confuse investigators. He believed that when the bodies failed to burn fully, substitute corpses were used to hide the truth and delay discovery. Despite the new DNA evidence, one thing became clear: the mystery of Hitler's death was far from over. Every new discovery raised more questions than answers. Yet despite these forensic breakthroughs, entire nations and intelligence services refused to accept closure, launching one conspiracy theory after another. The lies that followed. When the war finally ended in May 1945, the world waited for confirmation that Adolf Hitler was dead. People needed proof that the man responsible for so much destruction was truly gone. But instead of clarity, confusion spread like wildfire. In June of that year, Soviet officials held press briefings claiming that Hitler's remains had never been found. This simple statement ignited one of the longest-running mysteries of the 20th century. If his body had vanished, could he have escaped? The idea was too tempting for the world to ignore. Newspapers across Europe and America began printing wild theories. Some claimed Hitler had fled to Argentina, where loyal Nazis helped him build a new life in the mountains. Others insisted he had been taken to a secret base in Antarctica, protected by hidden submarines and advanced German technology. There were even stories of U-boats carrying the Führer to remote islands, where he continued to plot his return. As the rumors spread, a new claim took root. Perhaps, people said, the man who died in the bunker was not Hitler at all. Maybe it was a look-alike used to fool the world while the real dictator slipped away. Soviet-era books even claimed that they had filmed the body of a man who only resembled Hitler. These stories blurred the line between truth and myth, creating a fog that made facts nearly impossible to separate from fantasy. In the years that followed, intelligence agencies tried to uncover the truth. The CIA and the FBI received countless reports of alleged sightings. Some said Hitler had been seen on farms in Argentina. Others placed him in monasteries in Spain or even walking the streets of New York. Agents followed every lead, searching for the slightest trace of evidence. But time after time, each report turned out to be false. Not a single piece of credible proof supported the escape stories. The dental fragments discovered by the Soviets remained the only reliable evidence of his death. Yet, despite this, the lies refused to die. Stalin's government found the confusion useful. By keeping Hitler's fate uncertain, the Soviets could manipulate both allies and enemies. A living Hitler made Western powers uneasy, while a dead one brought no political advantage. This deliberate secrecy fed the rumors further, allowing the myth to grow with each passing year. Books, magazines, and later films kept the story alive. The idea of Hitler's escape became more than just a rumor. It became a cultural obsession. People wanted to believe that evil could somehow survive, that the story was not truly over. Writers filled pages with dramatic tales of hidden bunkers, plastic surgery, and Nazi colonies in South America. But beneath all the noise, the truth never changed. The evidence pointed to one reality: Hitler died in Berlin in 1945. Still, the lies he left behind created a ghost that refused to rest. The world's hunger for mystery gave that ghost life, turning it into one of history's most enduring legends. But for all the talk of escape, the final twist in this saga lies in the missing bones, the vanished skulls, and the silences of the state archives. The unending mystery. Even after the guns fell silent and Berlin lay in ruins, the story of Adolf Hitler's death refused to rest. For decades, the truth was buried beneath layers of secrecy, lies, and political manipulation. The Soviets, who had discovered the bunker and its grim remains, kept almost everything hidden from the world. Files were locked away in secret archives, and even top Western historians could not access them. Only in recent years have fragments of those Cold War records been released, revealing glimpses of what was once too sensitive to share. The newly revealed documents confirmed what many had long suspected. In 1970, the KGB ordered the destruction of what was left of Hitler's remains. The Soviet leaders feared that if even a fragment of Hitler's body survived, it could become a shrine for extremists or a dark symbol of loyalty for those still drawn to his ideology. They wanted the past erased, the evidence gone forever. Yet erasing the body did not erase the questions. Historians largely agree that the fragments of jawbone and dental bridges preserved in Soviet archives are the most reliable proof of Hitler's death. His dentist assistants had confirmed their authenticity, and later scientific analysis supported their claim. Still, not everyone was convinced. In 2009, DNA testing of a skull fragment, long displayed as Hitler's, cast new doubt on the story. If the skull was not his, what happened to the real one? Was it destroyed with the other remains, or was it part of a larger Soviet deception? No one knows for certain. The missing pieces, both literal and historical, continue to haunt the narrative. Beneath modern Berlin, the land itself may still hold forgotten clues. Hidden beneath apartments, parking lots, and concrete lie the last traces of the Führer bunker. Some believe that lost documents, sealed rooms, or buried evidence remain trapped below, waiting to be uncovered. Others think the truth was deliberately buried forever by those who feared what it might reveal. Germany's decision to leave the site unmarked reflects a conscious moral choice. The location is now an ordinary parking lot with only a small plaque hinting at what once stood there. There are no monuments, no flowers, no memorials. The silence itself feels intentional, a rejection of the man and the ideology he represented. And yet, the fascination never fades. The mystery of Hitler's final moments continues to draw researchers, writers, and conspiracists alike. It reminds us that history is not only about facts, but also about the secrets that power tries to hide. So after decades of lies, shifting evidence, and secret burials, did Hitler really die in that bunker? Or did the real mystery escape with the ashes and shadows of the Reich? What are your thoughts on it? Share your thoughts in the comments.